Good day, my name is Keith Feeling. This is my email address, this is my Twitter address, and I use Twitter all the time. As you can see from up here, I'm actually focused on the second half of analysing effective leadership, but this time I'm focused upon developing emotionally healthy effective leadership. The reason that's crucial because if you study things where it's only effective leaders, somebody like Hitler would be considered to be a very good effective leader, but not particularly emotionally healthy. The crucial part of emotionally healthy is they actually inspire others to follow. They don't force them to follow like you might have in the forces and things that other. And crucially, their behaviour. It's them, the character, the skills that they have that causes people to be wanting to follow them and actually to take responsibility. They take responsibility for others' actions and welfare. That's why it's crucial to understand that it's a much bigger picture. But when things go well, they are not taking the credit. They are making sure that the people as part of their team is actually taking the credit. The word team is crucial because it's essential to look at the whole of the organisation, the whole of the society as a team. People are being involved in this. And that's why these 12 books, 12 of the 100 plus that I've used over the years for my analysis are crucial because they try to unpick what it was that causes people to be effective leaders. And one of the things that I've tried to do over the years is to try to convey to people that actually this is not the proverbial rocket science. If you actually were on a desert island with about 50 people, then if you were trying to get off the island and you wish to vote and have a leader, what would you choose to have as your leader and what skills would they have? And that's why these 8 skills perhaps come to the fore more often than people would actually give it credit for. If you actually realise that we often lose sight of this, then it's a shame because it's not too difficult to appreciate that effective leaders are effective people that we admire and wish to follow. So consequently, one of the things that I'm going to focus upon today is how is it that these people, if you read biographies of people who've been successful, then quite often they can give you an insight into their early years as to what it was that caused them to become effective leaders. The majority of them, no disrespect to them, but don't actually know why they became effective leaders. Somebody like Winston Churchill, perhaps in his later life, always felt that his early years were preparing him for that. That's because in his early years he fought in the Boer War and he was in those sorts of positions. His problems occurred in peace times, and when he was a politician in peacetime he had lots of problems. But of course he became an effective leader when we went to war. And that's crucial that people understand that the sorts of development that we have is going to be massive impacts. And this book in particular, and Matthew Said's most recent book, both deal with the fact that if you've got a wide range of experiences, then you're given an opportunity to develop the skills that really matter in order to become successful leaders in the future. And consequently, the books that I've mentioned here, these ones are perhaps fairly recent books, but actually look at the research shown to try to develop some of these individual skills. The one that I perhaps would most recommend to people if they actually want to try to focus upon how we become effective leaders and an organisation is the book Legacy. The reason being is that what we have there is a book focusing upon a very successful organisation, team as it is, All Blacks. And the All Blacks, the rugby team, have been successful for 30 years. The reason being is that they built up a culture whereby people can continually learn in that organisation. And as soon as you're chosen to become an All Black, by definition you're involved in the decision making process and you've got to, if you like, be part of the leadership scenario. So consequently, when we're dealing with things like this book, The Captain Class, when you study the people who've been successful in teams which have had a good leader, it's important to appreciate that their early years was a preparation for them becoming effective leaders. One of the things that I want to try to emphasise is that this is not new, because we've had schools for centuries which have been, in theory, preparing leaders of our country. They're called public schools, and they were set up centuries ago to try to prepare people to lead the country. Often they were royalty, but then they went into government and so forth. But one of the crucial things that people don't appreciate, and to some extent Andy Selden is an exception to this, is that he realises that the reason that they become or are given the opportunity to go into leadership positions is because they create an organisation of schools whereby those skills are being developed. He calls them soft skills, I call them the skills that really matter. And that's why this is important, that we appreciate that if we really want to develop emotionally healthy, effective leaders, we've got to start young. And ironically enough, about 16 years ago, 15 years ago, we started to move down that road and started to look at what their children really need in their early years. The trouble of it is that although we did a great job up to the age of 5, our schools then move basically to focus upon just 2 of these skills, literacy and numeracy, and almost neglect the other areas. And that's a great shame, and recently it's become prevalent that these other areas are what's going to give us the best chance of getting through this coronavirus crisis that we've had for a few months. And the ability to learn effectively has been shown to be quite weak in a lot of people, because they're now being expected to learn without the aid of specific teachers. And one of the things that I've found fascinating was from my early years in teaching, began in 1974, that I had to write reports, and the reports were asking me about various things that really mattered in the children that I was teaching. I was teaching PE and science at the time, and it struck me that the things that really mattered with our children were being written down in the reports, but then at the end of the year we were assessing them on stuff to do with exams which were relatively of lesser importance. And then when I started to start references for these children and for my staff, it became clear to me that again these 8 areas were the things that they were being asked for. And because I had taught A-level and had to write many university entrance statements, it was obvious that the things that mattered in their chances of being successful at university weren't just their academic ability, but actually these 8 skills. And I felt bizarrely that from the 80s onwards that this should be much more prevalent in our assessment. So I started to develop a profile as I call it, of the skills that really matter. And my students and staff and parents all found this absolutely invaluable, because it began to analyse for them what really mattered and where their stumbling blocks were, wherever the area might be. And crucially, as people began to grasp that this is what really mattered, they became better at assessing themselves and assessing other people. But without that practice, I'm afraid it's not so easy. Consequently, I've been searching for schools, countries, etc., where they do this in a much better way than us. Perhaps the Scandinavian countries, Denmark and Finland in particular, focus much more upon the whole child, which is perhaps what we don't tend to do so much here, certainly from secondary school onwards. But one of the crucial things is there are KIPP schools, knowledge is power schools in America, where they've begun to realise that this is what really matters. And that's the shift that needs to happen in our country, where the emphasis and priority of exams is actually being substituted by the emphasis of these skills here. Doesn't mean to say we get rid of exams, but they just don't have the level of priority that we presently give them. And the thing that perhaps makes it most galling is for many decades, and 2007 yet another expensive independent study into leadership in schools came up with the same sort of analysis as I have, is there's a greater need for broader and deeper distributed leadership in schools. By definition, a teacher has to be a leader. So why aren't they being given an opportunity to be involved on a day-to-day, week-by-week basis, the leadership of the schools? All it means is that they're given a chance to have a say in what's going on. And that's why this book, The Fifth Discipline, which I'll deal with in a bit more detail in another Keith talk, is actually at the heart of this OECD UNICEF working paper, is that why don't we make schools learning organisations? What it means is we create a learning atmosphere. We don't have an us and them. This is the leadership team, this is the rest of the school. Everybody is part of the leadership team. Everybody has an opportunity to take part in that decision making. And one of the crucial things for me is, as I've looked at this for the last 3 decades, is that where you've got a whole team involvement in the decision making, you can immediately sense that it's an emotionally healthy school. It's an emotionally healthy organisation. It isn't a school where they're thinking they're making the decisions, we're having to carry these things out. And that's an important part of it, because if we are dealing with people who basically have a decision making, we need to understand what it is that's motivating them. And again, it's another area which I'll deal with in more detail later on, spirodynamics. But it's crucial that people appreciate that if you're in an army or a forces or something like that, these people are being told what to do and they have to conform. Most of our organisations are not like that, certainly in public services, and consequently you need to get them to be involved in the decision making so that they're inspired and they believe in what they're trying to do. And this leadership framework, which comes from this book, again illustrates that unless you understand the people you're dealing with, you're not going to be an emotionally healthy, effective leader. Consequently, these books are crucial if you want to find out how to become an emotionally healthy, effective leader. It's important for me to emphasise that in the main, sad to say, like we have in most sports, people who are great practitioners, and these people who are really good leaders don't necessarily know why they are particularly good leaders. And that's one of the crucial parts, that by looking at their biographies, what they did in their early years perhaps may give you an insight into how they developed these skills and the range of opportunities that they actually had in order to develop those skills. They may not know that, but by you reading their their biographies, you may discover that. And consequently, it's no surprise to me, though it seems to have surprised a lot of people, that in the recent months during this dreadful crisis, and we're in May now, that there have been some interesting leaders who've done extremely well. They've led the countries. Now, it's no coincidence that they happen to be women leaders. The reason that I say it's no coincidence is because when I did my research 30 years ago, it became obvious that with these skills here, that if you are a female, then you're more encouraged to take part in activities which develop all those 8 skills. And when you're leading a family, which many of these women may well be doing so, you're actually having to display and observe these skills on a day-to-day basis. So then transferring them into larger organisations, into teams and nations, then it's no surprise to me that the future is female, which was a term I've used for nearly 30 years, because they're more likely to have the range of experiences which give them an opportunity to learn the skills that really matter. I hope you found that useful. I hope sufficiently to tune in to some of the other Keith Talks. Thank you.